listeners and through the story itself. And so I invite you to take a look around at your co-creators today. It's your listening that's going to call forth what we are going to experience today. And it's your nourishing and feeding our collective conversation that will broaden and expand and deepen and direct the flow of where we go. So there's going to be a few times that I'm going to genuinely ask you questions, and I invite you to answer them, to really consider them, and just know that your voice is really wanted. And what I would say is you can always, as you can see, throw up your hand, or you can place something in the chat box, and I will maneuver around those spaces today. So let's begin by placing your feet on the earth and closing your eyes. And just receiving, taking in a nice deep breath. And just seeing where does the breath land in your body. Just noticing where did it go in your body. And then exhaling. And exhaling the day so far. You might want to just shake out your shoulders and bring a little movement into your body, rolling your neck. And this time, when you receive that breath of life, I invite you to really consciously receive this breath as if it is receiving this gift that you've given yourself, this hour to rest and luxuriate into the realm of sacred storytelling, returning to story as a sacred art form, one of the first ways that humans learned and knew how to relate to each other. And as you're ready, just exhaling. And exhaling, if you can, any expectations, any ideas about what story is. Can you just let it all go for a minute? This time, as you inhale, inhale just noticing your position. Are you leaning forward, overextending in life? Are you kind of slunched back, kind of avoiding life? Are you kind of slumped in the corner and like weighing down these organs that are doing all this work to keep you alive? So I invite you in this moment to, before you change it, really feel it. Really bring all of your attention to feeling what this physicality of your body structure feels like, because this is our vessel, right? This is where our stories, when we're storytellers, they do come through this. And so it's nice just to do this check in. Where are we in the resting position? And then how do we bring some consideration into the alignment? And so one of the easy ways to bring alignment, I feel, is to imagine that there's a string at the top of your head that lifts you up and just lifts you like a balloon, like a helium balloon, right up. And oh wow, your spine just straightened and your organs got all this support and strength. And to some of you this might feel really good, and to others it might not. So I'm really going to invite you to find your alignment, what feels good, support it. And sometimes in this position, it's really natural for the shoulders just to want to roll back. Those of us who sit in front of a computer a lot really need to do that. And as you roll those shoulders back, your heart will open. And now this is a moment to really notice, what does it feel like to have your heart all the way open and exposed in this way? And I invite you just to take a moment to come rest in the place of your heart. Imagine that you are the actual heart. You can feel yourself inside this body. And just feeling that for a moment. Does it feel good to be this exposed in this time? To some of you, it might be a relief. And to some of you, you might want to actually release this position a little bit. And this exercise is just in a noticing what is going on in your vessel, in this body today. I invite you to listen for that heart of yours, that open heart that wants to come to a place of listening to stories and learning about stories that open other hearts. You just went through this tiniest exercise to come to a place where you would open up that space in your own body, and you felt what it felt like, either good or not good, or challenging or not challenging. And now what is it to you for you to ask that of other people? Not through their body, but can you do that through your words? Through the stories that you tell, can you actually change the shape and form of how someone else lives inside their body? I'm going to begin with a quote. You can keep your eyes closed if you like, or I will read you this quote. And this quote goes a little bit like this. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or to hate, to see or be seen. And too often, stories will saddle us, and they will ride us, and they will whip us onward, and they will tell us what to do, and we can do it without listening or questioning, and we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit, and I love to begin with that quote because it really speaks to the journey, I think, of what it means to be a conscious creator. And that's going to be one of the things I'm going to really focus with you on today. We're not just talking about telling any stories. We're talking about telling stories that have a nature of healing inside them, right? So it's a slightly different angle for a story. So when are we talking about when it means to be a conscious creator in our times, to be so aware of the power of our language, our power to influence and shape the world around us. And so what is Rebecca Solnit, this very activated journalist in our time, warning us? Well, she says, before you open your mouth to tell the story, first might you learn actually how to see one. May you actually see and become a student of stories so that you understand that part of your job before you carry a story is to understand who was the creator of that story. What were they in service to? Is that story on the take or actually a gift? And I invite you to start putting on your super spidey storytelling goggles so that you can start spotting the stories all around you. And so, it begins when we're kids, right? We're given these wonderful stories, these fairy tales that shape us and that really inform what we look at and what we expect from the world. And then while we're now we're in the world of television, all these things. So start thinking about what are all the different stories. If your entire world is made up of stories, can you start naming them? Oh, that's the story of be the good girl. Oh, that's the story of evil. Oh, that's the story of right and wrong. See if you can't start putting titles on all these narratives, because what happens when we put a title on it? Whoo, we get a little perspective. We can walk away a little bit. We can walk around the story, and we can start to make that choice that she speaks to. Is it a story that we want to carry? Okay, I'm going to read you another quote. This is one of my favorites. My cousin Helen, who is in her 90s now, was in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II. She and a bunch of the girls in the ghetto had to do sewing each day. And if you were found with a book, it was an automatic death sentence. She had gotten hold of a copy of Gone with the Wind, and she would take 3 or 4 hours out of sleeping from every night to read. And then, during the hour or so when they were sewing the next day, she would tell them all the story. These girls were risking certain death for a story.
I don't know if he's going to let you in now.
I don't know either, but I am going to put mute on because that way we can all stay in one story together. You know what I love about this is that things happen for a reason, and we are in a time of great distraction, right? How do we stay focused? How do we fight for the focus when the world is begging to distract us? And so these girls that were in the Warsaw Ghetto would risk a certain death for a story. And when she told me that story herself, it actually made what I do more important. Because giving people stories is not a luxury. It's actually one of the things that you live and die for. That quote is by Neil Gaiman. So in case you are wondering about the power of your stories, you just never know what you're going to create today and how it might influence way beyond your lifespan. Here's what we're in for. You are in for a time of looking at story as a sacred art form. So we're looking at story through the lens of what is what is the landscape of sacred storytelling. So that's what this is, an introductory class to that. We're going to speak a little bit about what is a story, why is it relevant to the times that we're living in to understand it, what is a sacred story. And today we're going to do a slightly different focus, which is we're going to look at working with stories as really understanding, like, what if you came into this world with a very, very unique capacity to heal the times that we're in. And how do we get to source that mythos inside of you? Okay, so we'll play with a little creativity exercise at the end. I hate to call things little. I do that sometimes. So I love studying language. I want to talk to you a little bit about where I came from, and I'll keep this short so we can get into the goods. A little bit of my story is that I was rescued by stories as a child. I was rescued because I was one of those ones that had an unusual childhood, and I moved almost every year of my life until I was 15 years old. And being the new kid in every school and in every town was really hard. And those stories, those authors, John Steinbeck, Albert Camus, all these different people saved my life. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. They gave me a life that I couldn't participate in. They gave me a sense of belonging, connection. And so I really learned early on the power and the gift and the generosity of storytelling. I learned the responsibility of storytelling when I was 16 years old and my best friend in high school committed suicide. And I went to that thing, that place that I knew as home and as a safe place. I went to the written word to try to make sense of the pain that I was feeling and the confusion. And I ended up writing a play. And I submitted that play into a playwriting festival, and I got to see it performed on the stage. And that's when I learned the responsibility of what you put out into the world comes back. Because as I was learning how to manage my own grief and speaking that into the world, then I also became that one that stood at the threshold of listening to and being with other people as they were alive in their own grief. I learned the business of storytelling and of theater when I went off to New York City, studied theater at the Neighborhood Playhouse with Sandy Meisner. And I went on to go work off Broadway and at Summer Stock, and there was this magic that would happen in the room, and it was palpable, and I could feel it, and I wanted to know what to do with it. I was very compelled by this idea that we had created something, and that yet the second you walked out the door, it just like went away, and I wanted to know how to harness that energy. And because I was really very fascinated in environmental protection and social justice, I was looking for a way to weave in this story and action. And that ended up coming through in terms of I got a master's in social work and community organizing, and ended up producing short films there, and did a very large scale event on political engagement. And it began with listening to where people were. That ended up getting me a job with Al Gore at his television network in San Francisco, where I then produced and hosted the Green Channel. And there I learned that people with good intentions can do good harm. That if you don't understand your responsibility of a storyteller, and if you don't understand how to put your moment in the context, that your job as a sacred storyteller is to create an opportunity for wholeness, whole, holy, they're made of the same word. That you could be this, if you take it and you try to pull one thread out or one piece of data and you make a lie and you tell people that's the story, then you could be doing some more harm. So while I was working at the Green Channel, I really worked on this recipe. I really believed that if you gave people the information that took them to inspiration, that would bring them to motivation and then to activation. And when we looked at the data showed us that that was the wrong question to ask. It wasn't the information that people were looking for, it was the stories. And something about seeing that liberated me from that entire form and brought me back into the truth of who I am, which is really someone who works in the realm of story. So to go back a little bit about what I was just speaking about, the danger, is I would say that the climate movement, really misconstrued a piece of the story where a lot of times people will give you the data and they act as if the data is the story. rather than put the data in its proper role, which is playing a role in a greater story, and that we are one moment part of a massive story. So, to tell a true story of climate change, we have to really, really understand and be humble enough to understand that we're part of a greater, greater, greater whole. And if I would also say, if we have people in that realm, one of the biggest things that oftentimes people in the climate movement forget to do is they forget to give us a role to play in the story. So if you're someone who really cares about activating people and engaging people, remember that there's got to be a place for them in the story. Okay, we're gonna let's come back to some of the most ancient pieces of information around language and why do we care? Why does it matter? So the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or set it into motion. And if you want to get to go feel the resonance of a culture that has not forgotten the power of their words, go watch some hula on YouTube. Go, if you have a chance to go to Hawaii past all this craziness, really have an opportunity to go experience that. This is a group, indigenous cultures, they knew how to call the rain. This wasn't some fantasy or some dream. They understood the power of their language in relationship to the world that they are in, not as being separate, but as whole. So again, we're seeing some old hints of, oh, humans are an inherent part of this great whole. We're not so separate after all. Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe. I always think about that in terms of, approach slow when you're in an argument when the heat rises so much because what you say can never be taken back, for better or for worse. Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to the present so that the future can exist. And all of the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I want to say that again because it's kind of mind blowing. When we come back to this inquiry of like, why are we here? Well, let's come back to some of the oldest understanding that all the ancient cultures agreed humans' unique role was that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. We're needed. There's a word, abracadabra. It's one of the most ancient words on this planet. It comes from the Aramaic mysticism. I create as I speak. And there's this new word. I just learned this, and I'm so excited that I have to share it with you. It's actually a mathematical term. It's called um, asymptotes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it. The concept is out of physics that once something has been spoken, it is part of the fabric of our universe forever. That every vibration that we put into the world, it doesn't just get like wiped away. I've been thinking a lot about that when we think about the times that we're in. I know that we have a lot of Canadians here, but there's also a lot of Americans here, and whoa, what a time, to be in this country, with so much conflict and so much fear of the unknown. And so as we approach this and we say, okay, I think I'm in a room with people who want to be part of the healing of this time, that's what this is what the call is for. And so one of the ways, could it be that one of the ways that we can literally meet this, when there is so much discourse, when there's so much conflict, when there's so much hate, that we can actually not combat it, because what is this language of fighting, right? So oftentimes we're thinking we're fighting against. With language, we have an opportunity to choose life by fighting for, taking that fighting energy and saying, I'm for something. And so, what are you for? Are you for peace? Are you for love? Are you for community and connection and communion? Because, wow, what would it be if every story you spoke, that was the vibration that came through you? That's what you're feeding into our times. Create as I speak, abracadabra. Okay, so let's kind of come into let's really completely come into a collective conversation. Thanks for laughing, Kelly. What is a story? What is it? Yes, there's going to be a replay. There's always a replay. It will be emailed. Um, what is it? What's a story? I invite you to raise your hand. I've got my eyes on you. You can also put it into the chat box. What is this thing? Yes, Juliet.
Well, I mean, in many ways, story is history. but I think people inject a lot of soul into story. So it's a way of conveying uh, your journey or a people's journey or a journey of experience or triumph
Okay. So
or disaster.
okay, I'm picking up on three things: history, soul, and journey, right? So, like Australian said, like, the history of the past must be sung to the present in order for the future to exist. There's a part of our history that's part of every single story. It can't help it. It's going to come through our perspective. Have five different people tell the same story, and they can't help but tell it in five different ways, even if they're using the same language, because they are five different humans with five different life experiences. It's kind of the magic of it. Lisa, you can raise your hand by literally placing your hand up in the air, and I will see it. You also spoke about the journey of the soul. Okay, so now we're talking about that it's not this flat, dead, one-dimensional thing. It's got some life in it. We're like, oh, okay, well, this is another piece, and it's a journey, right? So it's not like I got up this morning. That's a fact. That's not a story, right? A story is going to take us on a journey. It's going to bring us somewhere. John Young actually also speaks about the impeccable nature that a story can be very, very short. You know, um, if you get up from the fire, the lion's gonna eat you. It's a very short story and it's factual, but it's also a teaching story. It teaches young ones, hey, don't go wander into the dark at night by yourself. So that's a we can it can be shaped in different ways. Um, what's another way of looking at what is a story? Says
Rena,
Rina,
Rena.
Rina.
It's nighttime here. I'm in Israel.
Ah, welcome.
um, uh, well, one of the facets, I think there are many ways of looking at story, but I think one of the ways is trying to make sense out of things, out of
Right,
experiences, out of feelings that come up,
right.
out of human interaction, out of disasters, and all kinds of things, trying to make sense. That's one thing. And then another way of looking at it is also trying to communicate, or a way of communicating part of yourself.
Mm-hmm,
You're talking about a personal story, and it can be just sitting with your family or sitting, with a friend. It doesn't have to be with an audience.
mm-hmm,
You're telling them stories that you're sharing something of who you are. So it
yeah,
can be at a grand scale and it can be on a very small scale.
yeah.
And it's more interesting when it's a story than when it's just an anecdote. I went here, I did this, I did that.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this, I wear that, that kind of thing.
So let's come back to this piece of, you're saying so much, right? You're talking, hey, if I put a little bit of life force into my story, I didn't just go to the post office today. I went to the post office and dude, there was this man there with a hat 6 feet tall, and I've never seen anything like it. And I didn't want to talk to him because it's Corona and nobody's supposed to be touching each other. But I couldn't resist, so I walked 6 feet back and I said, "Hey, what do you think?" So it's like you can play with like you can give a gift in the way that you bring your story to the world. Storytellers, we've got great license because we are giving. There's a difference between taking. A lot of times, see me, feel me. Oh, we're in a weird time, right? There's such a lack of connection. People do need to be seen and feel. But when you come into the threshold of being a sacred storyteller, you know that you're giving. You're giving your life force. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So you're talking about the play. You can play with it. But you also said something about meaning making. And this is huge for storytellers, that we have this opportunity to create context and make meaning. I have a teacher, Stephen Jenkins, and he said, this is a story and it really happened. you know Meaning that a story you can have more fiction, you can have more truth in a fictional story. One of my favorite things to do right now is to take, you can also work with stories and collaborate with them as these sacred allies and be like, wow, I'm trying to make sense of this world right now. How when I look out at the world, it's so weird. Let me get some context, make meaning for this. What if we're going through a great initiation? Oh, okay. I mean, it's not just about me in some weird country that's falling to shreds. Oh, what if the planet is on this great initiation? Oh, wait, what if our planet is not yet the great mother, but we are holding the dream of her becoming the great mother she most wants to become. And yet here she is, a young maiden, making some bad choices about who she dates with. Sometimes they just can't stop fracking her. Or perhaps she's learning about this experience of overgiving and she keeps giving her gems so that she'll be liked and wanted. And then she realizes, wait, some of her gems are being taken without her permission or her consent. And so now she's going to start learning about boundaries. She's going to learn about how to say no, thank you. But maybe she doesn't know how to say thank you yet. Maybe she's just kind of upset and hysterical. And so the world is storming because of it. You see, so now all of a sudden we're taking all the politics of the day, the confusion of the day, the climate, the science, all of it, and we're getting out of the facts and information and the politics, we're getting all of it, and we're just saying, oh, can we create a context and a story that brings another perspective of looking at the world, but again, brings me into a place of having a role to play. If this planet is in a great initiation, okay, now I have something to do. I have a role to play. I have an opportunity to be an assistant, a guide. And as she heals, I heal. As I heal, she heals. Oh, now it's mine to heal. And as I do this, will it actually am I a cell in a greater body? And so as my little cell heals, now something else happens. We're playing. We're playing, And as storytellers, you have to be careful with your playing, right? Because we have so much power and influence. So that's why, as a story catcher, you want to be very, very, what's the word? It's not deliberate. It's not decisive. It's, oh man, it's when you choose, really choose which stories. Discerning, aha, you want to be discerning about what stories you allow to take seed in you, that you allow to give your precious life force. Okay, another way of looking at what is a story is, and it's very unpoetic, excuse me, but let's say that we understand that humans look at themselves through the latest technology. That's the language that we often describe ourselves. And so if we say, okay, technology is our latest technology, and so a story is an operating system. And in that operating system, we learn our belief systems, our values, what we believe is possible. We receive the expectations of what we should expect from the world, what roles we're supposed to play. So now start thinking about, a lot of us who were given fairy tales as children, especially women, there was a little certain fairy tale about what we're supposed to expect from relationships. Well, that was a mess. We didn't know even how to put context into it. It's like we didn't have this whole idea of happily ever after. No, it should be, and that's the end of that chapter. Next chapter begins with this. Right? Okay, now that's a little bit more realistic, and now we have something more accurate to match our world experience with. There's been a lot of people that have been having to escape the stories and crack open these old stories, and you have to ask, what were those stories in service to? We could do an entire class on that, which we're not going to get into, but I really invite you to think about that. In the television shows, they call it programming. Literally, that's what they call it, television programming. So again, start thinking about what television shows are you taking in? How do they make you feel? Do they make you feel enlivened and excited for life itself? Or are you seeing so many images of women being beaten and raped and harmed that you can't help but be terrified of the world? There's some amazing statistics of how much violence against women is shown in television shows. And it's coming straight at us. And if we're not aware of it, we can't dodge and duck. This is what I love about when you got your super sacred storyteller goggles on. You can watch all the stories go by and choose which ones you want to catch and play with. Okay, what's a sacred story? What distinguishes them? What's a sacred story?
It deals with spiritual. This is Ann Winston. Oh,
Hi,
and it, can you see me?
I can.
Yes, but it deals with our spiritual and our spiritual experiences, and we use all our senses. And I
Okay.
think stories, like I'm here with a new grandson, and I think that stories are something that we kind of give as a gift to the next group coming up
Yeah.
and to our children. It's like it's like Titnahan and Be a River. In the storytelling, you're kind of a river.
Mm,
You're telling your tale and you're taking what's sacred to you and you're offering it as a gift
mhm,
to your children and your grandchildren.
mm. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I need to add to that at all. I think you just said it so beautifully. Like, what is it to give something as a gift? Anyone else want to play with what is a sacred story?
Um, I I think a sacred story is, for me, comes from an authentic, deep,
Mm,
knowing place um, as I discover it.
mm. So it comes from, okay, so you're talking about a couple of different things. You're saying that there's some authenticity to it. It comes from a place of their depths. So you're not saying that it's strategic, you know. You're not saying there's a point that I want to make, and so I'm going to make it through this story. You're not saying, you know, I think of that sometimes as we enslave stories. We take a story and we wrap our ego and we force it into this corner, and then we say, you do this job, you know, and listen to the language. It always tells us when we use a story, people say, I'm going to use a story to make this point. Okay, well, look at the etymology of using. It's going to take you back to employment. It's going to take you back to the language of slavery. Okay, so
Mm.
I like to be very careful about, I don't want to use a story. I don't want to be used myself. What is it when you understand that there's a life inside of a story that can be collaborated with, that can guide you? What if the story could guide you more than you could even guide the story? You know, and that there's a sense of authenticity in it, that's just coming straight from your heart. So now I can talk about some of the hardest things. I could even tell you a story about things that you don't want to hear, but it's not coming from my mind trying to change your mind or my mind driven to make a point. It's coming from something else. It's coming from a lived experience. It's coming from a perception. You know, and one of the amazing things that they've done some extraordinary research on is how stories can change people's minds. And they did this through a bunch of television shows, specifically around sexual identity. And they took a group of people who were very clearly opposed to sexual identities other than the classic feminine masculine identity. And they showed them television shows where they got to see people play roles of people of different varying sexual identities. And after the first one, they were more open to it. By the third time they saw these stories told from their perspective, life seen through these people's eyes that they had judged before, now there was this form of acceptance, you know.
Mm.
So it's like, again, I'm sure the producers had an agenda, but what did the story itself? What was the story itself doing? Um, Danan FNV is saying that a sacred story, there is life and death in the power of the tongue. Oh, I've never heard that. I like that.
Mm.
Life and death in the power of the tongue.
There's a wonderful rabbinic story, a midrash, a rabbinic story about life and death, and somehow I'll get it to you because it's a wonderful story.
Bring
Yeah.
it to, you know, on Facebook, there's a group called the Story Sanctuary, and it's really where we
Mm.
can share these kinds of
It's-
stories. So that'd be great.
What's it called?
It's called the Story Sanctuary.
Okay.
Okay, so another way of looking at a sacred story is that it it has a life in it, and it has let's even say, you know, the one problem with calling it a sacred story is that it's a trap. And it's a trap because anytime we call one thing sacred, we're inherently saying, by just employing the language, that something else is not sacred. Okay, so we have a situation, and yet we must, you know, it's a complex word, but I'm just going to say, I am choosing to call on that language because so many cultures have actually lost their relationship or their knowledge or, or history of seeing the life in all things. And so if you weren't raised that way with that indigenous perspective of seeing the life in all things and honoring the life in all things, then now we need to actually call on that language to remind us or to inform us of how to approach life in this way. Okay, so now that's kind of where we go into that. Something weird is happening with the sound. Is everyone having that problem? Sounds like static. You know what? It's raining where I am and there's a tin roof. Could that be it? Are you hearing the rain? Yes. Sorry. Welcome to our environment. And then I have a very small tin roof above me. um, so, um, what is a sacred story? But it has, right, it has we see that it has a life form inside of it, meaning that we might call that life the muse. We might call that life the ancients, the ancestors. We might call that life the earth speaking out loud. What is a myth? A myth is a story that has no author. Where does that myth come from? From the land itself. To truly understand a creation myth, you might need to go to the place from which it came from and who spoke it. But what I love about myths is that the myths are still the wild creatures among us. They are the ones that have existed in the oral tradition, and they haven't been fully enslaved and forced into just one position for all of time. They are allowed to evolve and shift and change form and change shape, as all stories should be allowed to do. So when we look at a sacred story, we're looking at something that has that creative life force inside of it. And we can all call that creative life force whatever term and language is aligned with, with how you speak to and reference it. I would also say that the sacred story is in service to all life thriving. All life in service of life thriving. So that means that when you hear a sacred story, you come out with a little wiggle, a little spark inside you. Your heart is more open. You feel connected. You feel enlivened. You feel inspired. You feel energized. You can hear a story about the Holocaust. And I'll tell you one. It's a very short story. I received the story from a woman whose name I can't remember. And we were part of a women's retreat at Buckhorn retreat held by Dot. Dot's as an elder in Ashland, Oregon. And she called us all together and she said, anyone who wants to offer whatever they want. And this woman offered a storytelling workshop, and I went to it. And she says to us, I'm going to give you a story. I've never heard that before, that you could give one away. And all of a sudden I knew that I had a gift that I could carry. This story is about her grandmother who had been in the Holocaust. And while she was there, she shared a room with 5 other women. And they were very, very, very hungry. And there was a sense of starvation, and she could tell that people were on the edge of death. And so she took the one last thing of value that she imagined possessing, which was the wedding ring, which she had sewn into her jacket. And she went to the guard and she asked him if he would take her wedding ring in exchange for enough eggs to feed these women. And he agreed to this. But when he came back, he only had 5 eggs, not 6. And she looked around this room and she couldn't imagine how she could possibly make such a choice. How was she going to choose anyone among them not to be able to have food while everyone else could? And then she realized that the choice was bigger than what it seemed to be in that moment. And she took a bowl and she cracked those eggs and she separated the yolks from the whites. And that day, they sat on their beds and they gave each other facials. And what she did was she gave them their humanity back. So we can take people to the darkest places and the most frightening moments of life. But a sacred story it'll always take you through to the other side, right? You can trust, you can feel in the person who's telling it to you. They're going to take you to the other side. They're not going to leave you down the depths of horror. They're going to show you, what do you do when you have a decision that can't be made? Right? So it's like, I always carry that story because I always think, God, may I never have to be in such a position where I'm faced with what appears to be such an impossible decision. And yet, how grateful am I to understand that some things that will keep a soul fed and nourished is more than the food in that moment, but that it's the nourishing of the soul and of the spirit that can carry us through. That's why I love that story. That's what it says to me. It might say something completely different to you, and that's why I love stories. If we had more time, I would ask you where you were living in that story. What part are you playing? And that's a whole other thing. So let's do something, which is, let's take a moment and let's play with a small story structure. I keep saying small today. I don't know why I'm calling things small, but maybe sometimes it's just easier to approach things if we think that they're small. So let's come towards this and say, we talked about, that and shaped today's class and saying, what if, the world is in this great initiation, and what if you were here, you had this superpower to heal something that no one else had the capacity to heal, that you know something that no one else knows as well as you do. Okay. And now when we come to these kinds of questions, we're coming to it as a sacred story, right? Which means that it doesn't have to all come from us. Your ego gets to take the day off, just throw it away. If you are scrunching your head trying to think of what your sacred gift is to heal, no, that's not it. You want to open your forehead, put a smile, go for a walk. You're taking all of your thinking and you're putting it up here because you're allowing yourself to be open to the inspiration. You're allowing the muse to come knock on your door and inspire you and inform you, so that more wisdom than you possibly thought you could ever get your hands on can just flow through you, and you're just in awe of yourself as the wisdom flows through you. I'm telling you, this is totally within your reach. All you have to do is trust it. If there's anything that I see people do that gets in their own way, is they second guess what their thought is, or they stop the flow. So your job is just to keep that channel open, to allow yourself to be inspired. And if you don't know what, what if I had that superpower? What if I could heal anything? Okay, so now let's play with this and go a little bit deeper. What if the thing that you know how to heal comes from your deepest wounding? Oh golly, man, it's so obvious, right? So you want to come at this and say, okay, so we can go oftentimes to our childhoods. Okay, so I know I love the vibe here too. Good people, you guys are filled with goodness. It started right at the beginning when you brought all of your life force right here, and it makes such a difference, right? So, what if? So we come back to our that core wounding. Oh God, and maybe you dealt with abandonment and you experienced that, or maybe you had some expression of abuse, or maybe you have the story of being left out. Look, nobody gets out of this life unscathed. I hate to break it to you. You're not special if you have some big core wounding. We all get them at different times in their life because we are on this great journey and we've got a job to do, and maybe we're here to heal something. So wow, without that wounding, we might not be able to complete our mission. Okay, look at that. Woo, reframe all the way. It's like for those of us who have had major health crises, I'm forgetting the name here. Susan, who's talking about, wow, she's been working with all these different kinds of cancers. When I experienced my experience with thyroid cancer, whew, what an initiation it was. It liberated me from some of those old roles in my life that I could no longer live in. It gave me the exit door to something I didn't want anymore. There can be great gifts, but here we have the storyteller has that person, that capacity to all of a sudden everything that's happening. Oh my God, this is material. This is material for, and I'm just getting all the ingredients for this extraordinary gift that I'm about to give all of you. Oh yeah. That we ask for horrible, bad, inconvenient things. No, we don't. We ask for a beautiful life filled with thriving. When those things happen, and they will happen, then we say, okay, this is an initiation. Okay, now I'm in an initiation. Okay, so now the next thing that you can do is that bad guy, that person that's just driving you crazy, that meanie, that, the person that's causing so much harm. Oh, what if they're my master teacher? liberated. It's a tsunami move. What's a sumono? What's those wrestlers? You know, you just take it and you flip it on its back and you change it into something else. Okay, now you're my master teacher. You're not here to like make me shrink and become less of myself. You are asking me to find a strength in myself that nothing else in my life has given me an opportunity to do. Oh, you're asking me to find my boundaries. You're asking me to find my love. You're asking me to find my forgiveness. You're actually giving me a way to strengthen myself and to strengthen my character. We live in a culture, thank you, it's a sumo wrestling move, you know, so like we live in a culture, you know, many of us, I'm not going to say, it's always so dangerous when we say we've got people all across the world, so maybe if you live in cultures where there are still initiations in place. I live in a place and a time, and I was raised in a way where we had almost no initiations, you know, so but that doesn't mean that we aren't being initiated by life. And so when you come to the threshold of being a sacred storyteller, you understand, because what are you doing? You're that person that's bringing the wholeness, the holiness to our existence. You're bringing context and meaning. And because we have a grandmother among us who so loves telling stories, right? You know, and she's like, and she might be engaging those teaching stories. How great is it to tell teaching stories? I'll tell you why. This is a quick story, and then we're going to come back to your recipe. I got to go to the Pioneers Environmental Conference. Really worth your time to go to this. And they had the sacred storytelling tent. And they had some fellow from indigenous culture talking about, he was in his early 30s, and his young child was completely misbehaving, taking food off people's plates, cutting in line, and he was so embarrassed. And he said, you know what I realized? I had forgotten to employ teaching stories. The teaching stories, the unsung nanny of our time, you know. So they went home and they made up a story about good otter and bad otter. You know, good otter does this, bad otter does this. Now they're in a completely different conversation, right? Dad's not always telling his little boy, yes, no, 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 don't do that. Dad's just saying, hey, are you being good otter or bad otter? And then now what happens when you're on the receiving end of a sacred story? You are in a place of sovereignty. You get to choose for yourself what role you're going to play. So even if I come to you and I'm like, oh man, my boyfriend, the world is, you know, the ceiling is falling, he did this, and I did that, and he did this, you know, a lot of us just want to go give someone advice. But when we tell people a story about how we made it through something, now all of a sudden that person has that sovereign choice of making their own decision about how they're going to live. And it's a way of this weird word that's such a big thing and so misconstrued. Now we're part of a real relationship of empowerment, of really respecting and honoring someone else's life force and life force decisions, and how we truly act as guardians and allies in service of them. So when you come back to this story of, you know, this could be a wisdom story, this could be anything, but what you're looking at is, if you want to play with taking your story and placing it into the mythic dimension. Okay, this is my favorite way to play. I gotta tell you that. So you're looking at a story that's going to hold your medicine, this unique thing that only you know how to heal. And sometimes when we start talking about the literal facts, people do this weird thing and they start projecting onto us. It's a bad habit that people do, and they do this comparing thing, and they're like, well, I wouldn't want to have cancer, I wouldn't want to get divorced, or I wouldn't want to do that. And then they might miss the medicine of your story because they're so busy in their heads. So maybe you want to really protect your listeners from themselves. And so you're going to take your story and you're going to take it out of the literal form and you're going to place it into the mythic dimension, into symbols and metaphors and archetypes, so you're just helping them escape that trap. And they're still going to hear all the different relational ways, but they're not going to see it in the human form. And those non-human forms that live in you and them will also get to be heard and seen and felt in a kind of unexplainable way. So one way that you might do this is you can, you know, when I'm in my classes, I teach this really long process of grounding and sourcing and going on this journey to see yourself in the mythic dimension. But I'm going to give you a quick little hint, and we can do it in a second. So if you come to yourself, you might close your eyes and imagine you're allowing your energy go into your heart, and you're going to say, heart, you know, what is my great healing power? Okay, so you might have received a word. Okay. Now, some of you are being like, I don't understand that word. That's not me. It's like, I'm just going to ask you to just trust your heart in this moment and not allow your linear brain to get involved, because it's got facts and reasons and a lot of other people's stories on top of yours. So just allow your body being, your unconscious, to allow. Okay. So and you might want to share the words that came forward. I think you're going to inspire all of us if you feel inspired to share. So right, my healing power is my smile, right? So if I'm going to play with you with mine, okay, right? Desiree and I are in the same place. So mine would be love. I would say that part of my, and how did I discover that? After 20 years of writing, I look back at all my stories, and every single one of my stories is a love story. It's something that my unconscious is always working out. Well, what's part of my wounding? Part of my wounding was feeling not loved as a child. Okay. So, okay, now I could tell you, and I could spend my whole life carrying that wound and telling you that story. That's a choice that I could make. Or I could make that experience and I could bring it into another kind of context. I'm not talking about having a fantasy. I'm not talking about being delusional. You have to be very careful. You have to walk very slowly when you go through this, okay? I'm not saying ignore what happened and make up some other story. I'm saying widen your story. Get involved in telling the story of your soul, not just your human life. So if your soul came in, you're like, wow, I'm really, that planet's going to need some love at this time, and I'm going to do everything I can. Well, then who else will know that better than you if you know the wound? If you know the wound so well, now you're going to know the medicine to heal that wound like no one else will. So that's why I invite you into this deep wandering of, okay, rather than avoiding those wounds, those things that have so much pain, now can you go and approach them with the eyes of, your elder soul self, so you're putting on a different archetypal energy. How does your elder soul self go back and look at that wound and say, oh, you came to learn this, you came to learn that, you came to learn this, and now you've got this other perspective, right? So now here's your ingredients for your story. And now you might want to take it into the mythic form, and you might want to imagine, what's an environment that inspires you. Maybe it's the forest, maybe it's the ocean, maybe it's the back lot of a Circle K. Okay, allow yourself to be inspired. And then who are the beings that are going to come into relationship? Who are the beings who are going to come into relationship and engage with each other? Today, I I stopped off while driving at a stop, and I went into the bathroom, and I went in there with this kind of deep, sadness. It's like my family lives on the East Coast and I live on the West Coast. It's like my people live over here, but my soul and my heart is satiated over here. And I was just like, God, what conflict. And all of a sudden, boom, the story came into being about this tree that was the seed that had been carried across the country and landed in the forest on the other side and grew up amongst these other trees. And those trees, they were all family, and yet this one tree knew that the air that it was truly from, that the soil that really had all the nutrients to feed it, were someone else, or somewhere else. And what would it be for that tree to pick up its roots and find a way to go to the place where the soil that nourished it, while no matter what, still staying connected to the roots that raised it, right? So I can tell you a story about the conflict of me and my family, like all of us do. But now when we take it, we place it into the mythic realm. And now we're talking a story that brings us into that universal symbolism. And now we're talking about that element of when a story is about the listener, when we tell the story about the listener, or John Steinbeck says, if the story is not about the listener, it will not last. So how, when you tell your stories, can you find that universal thread that's about all of us? Okay, so I gave you a couple of ingredients to start playing with the recipe of a story. And I like to give ingredients, and I like not to tell you exactly what to do, because if I did, your ego brain would get in there and would try to do it all just right. But your story has a life of its own, and you are a human made of stories. So you will feel the beginning, you will find your way through the middle, and no matter what, you're going to make your way to the end. And that's going to be great. And then you're going to have to write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, because everyone knows that writing is rewriting. But that first stage of when the life is coming alive in you, and when you're letting it flow through you, that is when there is no critic. That's when you get to live in wild collaboration with that creative life force, which is so enlivening. And whether you choose to share this to someone else or not doesn't matter. Just I invite you into the play of it all. So, that is our introduction to sacred storytelling today. If you feel complete, then I wish you a wonderful day. If you feel compelled to continue on a journey of storytelling, I am going to tell you about 2 classes that are coming up, where you can really get much deeper into these practices and learn a little bit more specific techniques, and where you get to come out with a story of your own. So, and I just want to thank everyone for being here, because your listening was inspired, and your collaboration and what you brought was really rich. So thank you, everyone. So here's what's happening. Thank you, Andrea. Here's what's happening. We've got 2 really fun things coming up. One is a course that starts next Tuesday, and it's called Eros, Power and Purpose. And this is part of a year-long program that I teach. And I used to teach an year-long program, and people had to sign up for the entire thing. I just put the link in there. And I'll put it in again just because there's more comments coming through. And so this is part of a year-long program, and I used to do year-long programs where you could only come in at a certain time, and then you were in for the whole year. And COVID's happening, and there's so much unknown. And I was noticing that a lot of people didn't actually have the stamina to complete 9-month programs. So I got much more interested in doing something where we get much more intensive experiences, where you get to really focus in on one thing, go really deep, get your roots in there, and get to come out with a completed something. And so and then if you wanted to continue on, you could do that. And that's been a really fun way to meet the times that we're in and be authentic to what's really happening in terms of this unknowable world of mystery. Here's a little fun fact that I'm just going to tell you. Many people in the Western world have had the structure of the hero's journey somewhat forced upon us. One issue with that is that it demands that we have a bad guy, an enemy outside of ourselves that we have to conquer in order to understand the truth of what we are. So you see that there's an inherent flaw in that story structure. And so other stories from other different traditions, sometimes they make room for the mystery. They make room for the unknown. And so when you look at a culture that we're so used to all of our stories being cut and dry and a perfect ending coming at the end, it means that when there's great times of unknown, it's much harder for us because we literally don't have that operating system that makes space for the unknowable. Little fun fact. Okay, so here's what's happening. This Tuesday, tomorrow, we start with Eros, Embody Your Power and Purpose. And so this is a class that engages ritual, prayer, and ceremony to really activate who you are as a conscious creator, so you can live your biggest story, but also really gets to what of the story, what's your material, what would you tell that really engages your life force power and speaks to your purpose. So I would ask you, what are you in service to? What are you in service to? Not that you're going to say, okay, now I'm going to tell stories of love for the rest of my life, or I'm going to, love, love, love. No, maybe you can tell stories that bring love into the world and you never use that word. So what it does is it really focalizes the kinds of stories that you tell. But more than anything, this class is designed to really kind of go in for 6 weeks and do this exploratory mission about what is it that you know about power. What is it that you know about purpose? And really what we're doing is we're going in to look for what are the barriers in the way? What's in the way of you accessing your life force power? Where are you putting other people and projecting onto them where they are on pedestals, or you are below or above? It's like all of these will speak to what is your relationship to your own life force power. And we'll get to use all these different creative exercises for you to get to refine and see and examine this. One of the things and one of the ways that we do this, and what I love is that, and I'm sorry, I couldn't be sharing. I'm just going to share my screen for a second so you can see the page, and then I'll come back and talk to you and answer any questions that you have. Wait, hold on. I'm not trying to leave the meeting. I'm just trying to share. Um, Here we go. So this is Eros, and and the thing that you want to, the thing that I love about this class is that you're going to get a workbook. So you'll get the Psychic Silence Workbook, which takes you through a process of understanding what is living in your psychic space, meaning what are all the stories that are in your space that you're calling on consciously or unconsciously. And then what we'll do is we'll work with different rituals and different ways to actually transmute, transform, or activate and really engage and call consciously on those elements that will affect the stories that you tell and the way that you live your story. And then we have a lot of embodied practice. And you're like, well, what's an embodied practice? The thing that was really important for me as I did this is, there's in ancient cultures, we understand that it's the making things with our hands, it's the creation process that brings us, I think, most easily into the unseen world, because it's where our energy is not in our heads, right? We get a more embodied practice. It's easier to, I think, sometimes to be inspired when we're not trying to type or write or tell, so we bring our energy into something else. And so I wanted to give people a really embodied practice of experiencing yourself as a creator, especially when it comes to power and purpose, so you can see physically how you create. So this is what we do. We actually create a physical space in our home and transform it into a sanctuary. And more than ever, in these wild, unknowable times, to be able to have a sanctuary that is yours, that holds the life of the divine, that's literally designed for you to collaborate with the divine, where the divine lives in your home, where you've courted the muse, where you make a practice of it, and how does that then inform how you live in your life and in your story? And one of the things that I love about this particular practice is that when we look at this, I look at story as being a sanctuary. It's a temple. It's a place where you invite people into to have a very private experience of understanding their consciousness. And so who are you as you start to prepare to be the carrier of sacred stories? How do you prepare yourself to be that temple keeper? And this is a class that really brings you into that. I'm not going to get into all this because I feel like I've been talking about this with you. This is a longer piece. One of the things that we do is you'll have 6 classes with me, live, super interactive. You get a team of your team of greatness. So you get some people to work with outside of class, which is, I always feel like it's the needle and thread. Our class is the needle, and we'll poke the holes, and then this group that you work with will get to thread that needle, and you get to deepen the experience outside of class as well. So you get that in-person live interaction, and you have people that are there to really hold you accountable to what your goals are, to what you really want to accomplish, and who will really witness your own transition. And more than anything, I really like that these goals call out your greatness. That's what we're doing together. So there's 2 different classes that connect. I always say what you create creates you. I really believe that. What you create in terms of space, in terms of story. So for the 6-week class, that's 6 live classes. I bring in 3 amazing guest speakers. We're probably going to even have more than 3. We have Marta Maria, who works a lot with actually energy, and she will bring you into a really extraordinary meditation to understand your own piece. We have Kristen, who's going to teach about creating symbols, and it's an intuitive drawing class. And then I believe Kurt's going to join us, and he's actually an investigative journalist. And what I love about this is that he's going to really he's going to do a writing class on really how do you become part of writing about and attuning to what's happening in the world and using your voice for purpose. So I'm pretty sure about that one. We're still talking about if he's going to join us, but there will be at least 3 teachers. There's also have a private Facebook group where you can stay connected with, and you will always have permanent recordings of all classes. Then, after the 6-week class, right, that's the journey class. That's where we go in, we find all the material. And now it's all about, we bring out the gems, and then we give them away. And we give them away when we go into the wisdom stories. So we have we do arrows for 6 weeks, we take a 2-week break, and we come back for 4 weeks of working with our wisdom stories. And this is where you get to have the process of writing, creating, workshopping, and telling your stories, specifically your wisdom stories. What's your unique gift? What have you made it through? So you can take one, you can take both. When you take them together, you can get a reduced price. And we start tomorrow. The only other thing I'm going to show you while I'm here is There's an amazing class, and I really do call it amazing because it's such an exciting class. It's called Tell a Bigger Story. And this is a really potent, powerful class for people who are saying, hey, I have had that really challenging experience in my life that might be unresolved, or there's something that it was an initiation and I want to be able to give it away. And I want to have a different kind of experience with it. This course is designed to give you the skills and the technique where it's an all-day class and we'll take your whole story, and at the end you'll be led through a process and you'll be able to tell your story in a different way. And I think of stories like trees. They're designed to change and grow, you know. And so the incident happened, but we're not the same person because it happened. And whatever happened changed us in some way. And we get to really embody that and take that into our beingness when we bring it back out into the world. So that's a 1 day class, and if you have any questions, I also say that's a great class for practitioners. So if you're someone who works in the works in health or education, and you want to have the skills and techniques for helping other people work with their stories in this way, it's a great class for that. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is the Eros class, does that involve doing like writing? Is there like a writing workshop linked to that?
Yeah, so we will always write, we'll create. It's not a writing class per se, because my focus is on storytelling. And this class is also really understanding who you are as a creator. But we'll always do some kind of writing, we'll always do some kind of creative act. You'll always do some kind of, yeah, there's something that you're always working through writing or creation. Does that make sense?
And are you given homework? Because you said you break off into groups. Do you do that like outside the class?
I tell you, I've been doing these classes now I've been teaching online for over 3 years, and I've discovered something that a lot of times people come with the best intentions, but don't necessarily have the time to do the work outside of class. So I try to actually get us to I'll give you one big assignment to do outside of class, which is really fun and involves drawing and designing and doing all this stuff. But most of the time, I try to keep our exercises in the class so you have time to create, and then you can deepen and you can do more of the sharing, and you can workshop it and edit and change it in your small groups. Does that make sense? So if you're someone that comes in, you're like, you know what, I actually want to be with a group that's really into writing. You know, we will on that first day we break up into groups, and if we know that there's a crew that just really wants to focus on writing together, we'll make sure that you're together. Does that make sense? It's good to have people that are aligned. Yes,
Leah,
yeah.
I'm really interested in the course, and unfortunately Tuesdays are my work days.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know if there's any benefit to attending. And I sent you an email, so maybe we can do it that way, but in attending if I can't attend live,
Yeah.
how that might work.
You know, sometimes I've often had people from Australia and South Africa and different countries who want to be in the mix, but the time zones really don't work. So, you know, the truth of it is, it's so much more fun to be in live.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna
yeah,
not gonna lie, you know.
yeah.
Uh,
No,
our
I totally get that.
So, and what I'll say is that we'll make sure that you're assigned with a group, and so you can meet with the group live, and that would be the thing where you're out of class groups. The Facebook is still there, and we'll still have guest teachers, and those guest teachers don't take place on Tuesdays; they're usually on Fridays and Saturdays. So
That's
those
true.
classes you could do live. Okay. Any other questions, inquiries? I'm looking through chats.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
So how do we go about registering? Do you send us that information?
Yes, I will. I'm going to put the link right now into the chat box so that you've got it right here. And I'll also say this is part of a larger program. So if you're saying, wow, I want the whole program, tell me before you do that, because you get a reduced rate when you sign up for the whole program. And So I just put the link right here in the chat box. You can pick up and see right there. And then also later today, you're going to get an email with this replay. It's it's very well. It's very likely that it's going to go into your promotions folder if you're a Gmail user. So just just know that you need to accept this email or keep an eye out. Okay,
Leah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Um, so my question is, what if you already feel tapped into your power of being able to relate a sacred story or give a wisdom story, but you just need to understand how to get it out there, or even how to get your story created into a book, or how to um, not just get it out there, but how do you find your place in being able to share, like with what if you want to share it with children, and or and that's kind of the space where I'm in. It's not about finding the story so much, but
The
figuring
business,
out how to get it out there.
yes, the business of storytelling. Is that
Yeah.
I'm going to answer Andrea. I'm just going to answer one thing and then I'm going to get into your piece. Andrea's asking if there's an installment plan, and yes, there is. When you click register, I think on the right hand side of the registration page, there's payment plans. We do up to 3 payment plans on there. If you don't see it, email Katie at leahlamb.com and I'll put this in here. And then I'm going to answer your question. So the business of storytelling is a different class. Um, and so in this situation, I almost want to introduce you to one of another woman who came through and took classes here. It's literally what she does. She teaches people like the business of how to get your stories out. And so if you email me, Elena, um, is that who was just speaking? I hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, then I would happily make an introduction. And I'm also, you're inspiring me. I know that she's been wanting to teach this. I might actually see if she can do a 1-day workshop just on the business of storytelling. And, um, and yeah, it's a different thing altogether. There's
Hmm.
sometimes people come to me when they're trying to get something out into the world, and I do private sessions called storytelling priestessing, where I work with people individually and really act as your ally as you cross that threshold, because giving your work into the world is an initiation into itself. You come across so many of your own barriers, your own belief systems, and there's practical knowledge that you just need to know, in terms of the process of the business, and then there's your own stuff that most people need to also make their way through, and then so there's 2 different things. So if you're literally just the business of it, agents, how do you submit, how do you do that, we can, do you self-publish or go through a publisher? I'd be happy to introduce you to this other woman, and if you're looking for private coaching for someone to really walk with you across that threshold and help do story coaching and look at what you're creating and your own personal process, that's something that I also do.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. The other thing I just
This,
totally forgot about. Yes,
this is
I hear someone saying something, but then, oh, you know what, Anne, you put yourself on mute by accident, I think. You started talking.
Okay, let me see if I can. Am I unmuted now?
Yep,
No.
I'm going to answer one question. The question is something, how long is each session, Arrows? It's 2 hours.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, Anne?
Yes, I would love that information too. Could I just email you about the threshold between the storytelling and putting it into the world?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. The last thing that, I'm a storyteller, not necessarily the best business person, so I oftentimes forget to tell people what I do. Um, and I do work with people one-on-one, and I do a form of mystic storytelling. It's a form of divination, actually, where I work with you and see your story, divine your story as it's living in the mythic dimension. And so in those one-on-one sessions, you receive a song and a story, and we make sense of how are you living in the symbolic archetypal mythos energy. And so you can see that at medicinestories.com. And Desiree, Lovely. I would love to hear from you. If you just email me at leah@leahlamb.com and or email katie@leahlamb.com, she'll give you a link to schedule a time to meet with me to do what's called an information session, so we get a sense of what are you looking for and what's the best doorway to come in through. Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to leave you with a quote, unless I see another question coming in. Chandana, were you trying to say something? Oh, she just froze. Okay. I'm going to go into the world of leaving quote. I like to end with a quote because it's like it's good manners. It's good manners to end with the words of someone else, because it's giving a nod to those who have walked this path before you. There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours, clearly and directly, to keep your channel open. You do not even have to believe in yourself for it to work. You have to keep your channel open and be aware to the urges that motivate you. Keep the channel open. And that quote is by Martha Graham, our founder of modern dance. All right. And with that, I will take everyone. I invite you all to come off mute. And
Sorry, who is that? Who just said that? Sorry, who wrote that quote?
Martha Graham.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could you type it? I can't seem to hear you.
Martha Graham. Yeah, I'll write it. And then we can all agree with you. Okay. Farewell.
Bye. Thank you so much for everything.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so
Leah.
much. You are gifted. Thank you.
Oh,
It was a
thank
wonderful class.
Oh,
Thank you. I
wonderful.
Yeah.
loved it.
Yes.
Your energy is delightful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Your grandkids are lucky to have you telling them stories.
Oh, it's so fun. So fun.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye,
for
everyone.
sharing your
All the
magic.
best.
Bye.
Thank you. It's very inspirational.
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. Take good care.